The future of professional selling is
effective coaching and leadership,
virtual communication,
effective selling to new generation customers,
remote sales forces.
Sales as a service, selling Canadian real estate to Chinese buyers.
So we had a couple more questions after that, but we don't have time to show it, so we'll open the field to you guys if you have any questions for us.
Any questions from the audience?
How long did it take you to write your book?
This is a lifetime.
Well, why don't you give them some time and prompt them with some of the questions you thought
We
they might
could
have.
play more than
Oh, don't play it though, but just prompt them with what you thought.
Oh, there a question? Nope. I don't remember.
Yeah, questions we asked.
I thought that was really good, first of all. Do you think there are any industries where maybe like that would work, chart vision, or is it industry-wide?
I think it's going away quickly in most industries. I know most people think of servers, for instance. I'm a manager at Jack Astor's. And just like a trend that I've noticed personally, we use team-based service there. So the servers who are actually the best in tips and probably provide the best service are some of the worst team players we have at the restaurant. So every other server hates working with them because they're not pulling their own weight. So even industries like that, I can realistically see the transition toward a team-based approach to tips, for instance. So I think in general, it's going to be a fading term.
Oh, I don't answer questions, so do something.
From your research, I guess from the research you guys were doing for this, what's the biggest flaw that you've noticed in terms of how compensation is sort of relative to industry and sales?
The biggest flaw is that it's still stuck in the old style thinking that it's like piecemeal stuff, right? So if we increase motivation, that automatically means that they're going to increase performance, right? But now we're shifting away from the transactional kind of job into more creative jobs. So that same system stopped working because the studies have shown that commission structures they kind of inhibit creativity and inhibit creative thinking and inhibit the stuff that actually matters now. And back then it kind of didn't matter when they first came up with the commission structures. So the study shows that just being motivated doesn't mean your performance is going to be improved as well. It can also be inhibited because you're always worrying about your commission and you're focused on something that is outside of your control, really, in most of the cases, right? That's probably the biggest concern.
I find that I guess pay-based variable-based compensation puts blinders on people, so it prevents them from seeing growing the pie essentially with clients.
Anybody else?
How do you manage that change? So how do you take someone who is used to maybe has 30 years of experience with the commission-based structure and more team-based structure?
Well, the companies that we came across that have done this, there are some in the tech sector, some in service and restaurants, some in actual car dealerships or just regular sales positions. They noticed that 10 or 20% of the people who don't want to go for that change, they leave, and you attract a different type of salesperson to your team. But then on the other half, the big bump from say, for example, getting 25,000 in base to 70,000 in base to make up for the commission. That kind of helps a lot of those people who are already on the team, because they don't have to worry about their commission anymore, but they still get compensated with like the team bonuses, right? It's just a shift from, say, 30-70 to 50-60-40, the opposite way. So it is a challenge, and that's something that I guess most companies will have a concern, but we think it's worth it.
Yeah, some of the study did show that there is pushback. Of course, they've been doing it their entire career, but ultimately it's one of those things where it's going to pay dividends by transferring to that system, so it's kind of like deal with it or get it.
You talk about the compensation side of sales, how it's how it should be improved and stuff like that, but the basic core structure of sales is still viewed as a really, it's a really structural process. In other words, the concept it's just a numbers game. You just have to make calls, and you'll have a certain turnover and stuff like that. So my question is if the compensation side of things are going to evolve, do you think the reason why you said a lot of companies are still stuck in the old style method, is it because the basic structure is the same? Do you think that's the friction point? Because it's always going to be structurally the same. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to implement a creative compensation structure on top of that.
I think while there is a structure in place, that structure inherently involves creativity. Like you can follow just the steps, but at each point in time, there involves a significant amount of outside the box thinking or being creative or ingenuitive. But I think ultimately most of the pushback is just from being in the old frame of mind. But especially in terms of the non-transactional based relationships, it's going to naturally just progress that way, I feel.
I think it's like despite the structure, not because of the structure. I think that is just originally flawed, because now science shows that compensation, science back in the 1800s and 1900s originally said that commission works, and they thought that still applies today, but it doesn't really, because now studies have shown that it's not the best case, right? So I think it's despite the structure staying the same, because for that structure they need this type of compensation.
Time for one more question.
Have you guys looked into exactly what the best method is to shift from transaction to relationship motivation? Like, what if there's no employee buy-in?
I think that the shift is already happening, just because it's outside of the company's control. So people can find places online, and the companies that change their structures, they're going to be right. The customers decide which companies are going to remain profitable, and if the companies don't make the change, then they're going to feel it in their bottom line, because it's not a transactional. Everything that you need from transaction, you can Google it on the internet, right? So we think that the companies who are proactive will benefit, and the ones who don't are kind of suffer financially anyways, and that's going to be the impetus to kind of make the change.
And I think most of our research evolved circulated around what it is and where it should go, not necessarily mechanisms to create that shift.
You could probably do one more.
Anybody else?
Why not?
I have a question.
The one you asked in the video?
Hey?
The one you asked in the
No.
video?
So you think about shifts as a sales manager and compensation, so you're pushing me in this direction. What do I need to think about with respect to those other levers around organizational structure and skill sets and allocation of efforts? So what kind of advice would you have for a sales manager if you direct them towards this kind of compensation structure to also ensure that those other levers are coordinated?
I think that's kind of what we touched on in inspirational leadership, talking about how managers can't be just, and there's a huge difference between a manager and a leader. So it can't be the person who's delegating work, setting structures, setting goals. It has to be someone who's actually really involved in the process and takes on a meaningful position. So largely that circulates around, I guess, actual becoming a motivator, becoming someone who is setting a common goal that everyone feels comfortable reaching and motivated to do so. So I think it's much more becoming a leader more than just a manager.
I think we kind of touched on two of the levers, the compensation and on the training side of things, but we didn't touch on the corporate reorganization. But we think that obviously you have to have all three, but we kind of focused on the compensation and on the training because that's kind of the other important part of if you're going to shift to a higher base salary, you're going to have to train them and keep them motivated and satisfied in other ways than just getting the extra paycheck.
Okay.
Thank you guys.
Okay, so I guess we're not going to play that. We haven't seen any questions from you guys now.
We like just as an example with the whole J.P. Morgan case of the huge loss they have for bribing officials with giving their children jobs in China, which they just said was part of business with buoyancy and things. And from my own experience, a lot of underqualified people do get positions in China because their parents owe someone else a favor. Is that sort of, and sort of now that this is coming to light, is that sort of thing like, are there threats to this sort of relationship, transaction, sort of what Westerners might call bribery sometimes as far? Is that a threat?
So when we interviewed different sort of sales reps and looked at research studies in general, many Chinese managers actually believe that this bribery that Westerners would call it is actually just built into the Chinese culture and doesn't necessarily take just money transactions. It's like gifts, I guess on Chinese New Year time, family connections, if you're born in the same general location as this person. And there's many different ways. I think that if eventually this comes of light, maybe money transactions, the more obvious ones would die down a bit, but like different types of guanxi and bribery will still exist.
So if you're a foreigner and working as a salesperson in China, what are your recommendations? Obviously, it's not the same report building techniques.
Yeah, so that's what our entire presentation is. We were mainly targeting like foreign managers.
Oh, wait, can you repeat the question? Yeah, do you have any like solid tips?
Okay. Basically, just understanding what the culture is like. So it's more a focus on like building guanxi. The pace is slower. So but in the Booz and Coast study that we looked at, what they did was they looked at the top performers and they took those strategies and used that. So everything was very tailored. It's very customized rather than having like solid tips. So for instance, in China, you want the connections to be more intimate relationships rather than just, we're just going to sell something. So they needed to understand the client better. So they had things that allowed for more transformational relationships rather than transactional.
Did your video touch upon, is it just foreign individuals or could it be emerging companies looking to employ a Chinese sales force or employ their Western sales force to the Chinese market?
Our target market was anyone that was once educated in America going into China, whether it would be working for a Chinese firm or working for any foreign firm.
So in the case of a foreign firm, how would their organization change by implementing sort of these strategies? Because obviously they can't keep the same structure as what's viable in North America or the Western world, for that matter.
So many foreign companies are going in, and the reason that they're going to China is because it's a vast untapped market, well, tapped now. But so many foreigners are actually looking to hire a Chinese sales force because they just understand the Chinese market better, or at least they'll be conducting sales and selling to other Chinese firms. So we were hoping that this managing sales teams in China will be able to better deal with the relationships both with the client as well as with their own sales team.
I'm just sort of curiosity, like when you both worked in China, was there like any, I guess, anything that was shocking? Because I mean, you have spent time. Was there anything that you found like genuinely like, I didn't know this about, I guess, China?
Well, I found that it was really shocking that not to have like a strict requirement, like as an intern you have to do this, this, and this. So it's more like you go in, things are more relaxed, and they didn't have like extremely high expectations of you, but you had to take a more proactive approach to learn.
Just to add on to that, something that I found very surprising, I guess, is what's part of building this quality relationships. A lot of the culture is going out to karaoke bars or something like that, and catering, I guess, to clients, and you drink with them, right? So that is why actually China's a more, I guess, feminist sort of society. They're very modest, and like actually women don't really move to the top, mainly because of those reasons that sometimes it's seen as inappropriate, or they just can't handle the amount of alcohol that's required to like cater to the quality relationship that you go out early at night with your clients, and it takes, the sales cycle is actually a lot longer. It takes many karaoke bar nights to land the deal.
Do you find that it's a lot less like productive, the fact that it takes much longer this way? And like, I don't know if you looked into research on it, but like maybe they, like in America with those Walmart deals, like they're bigger sums of money than in China. I'm just curious if you looked into that.
I think that the Chinese really focuses on more of a long-term relationship, and usually like deals are done with the same company. You have to keep in contact, right? And that happens. We're not saying that Western firms don't do that. They definitely still maintain contact, but not to the same extent as in Chinese firms. There are also some other research studies I looked into. I don't think that this can be completely proven, as we didn't really look at the other side, just because these Chinese firms actually are a lot older, and they seem to be in the business for longer, and then they get in through connections with family and Western connections. So it already started from like a long-term relationship standpoint, and it generally goes like that. They rarely do business with like new firms almost.
Do you think that this is going to change? Like, do you think that that whole idea will become more westernized in X amount of decades, that they'll start taking things bigger and less focus on long term?
Can you repeat the question again?
Just like, in your opinion, after all the research that you've done, like, do you see this sticking, or do you think that this tradition is going to change and it'll just become more westernized?
I think I see it sticking because it's very embedded in the culture. We have a more individualistic culture, and they have a more collectivist. So in the collectivist culture, it's very much like family-oriented, more like the group's goals rather than your own. So it's a very like group mentality and very on building trustworthiness.
And because of this collectivist culture, there's less people, like the sales team is more willing to listen directly to what the manager has to say and accept all sort of rules and regulations and directions because of this whole team-oriented goal, and that has been the culture for very long. And I don't think like the collectivist individualistic culture may change, and that really directly affects like the sales culture as well.
If I have a business right now, is it better for me to bring my 10 best salespeople to China or find 10 better people in China that know everything and can do maybe a bit better of a job?
I don't think it makes a big difference either way. I think as long as you can learn and adapt, I think that's the key, just adapting to the different conditions in China's market.
There's certain training that needs to happen with both foreign sales teams as well as Chinese sales teams because of how competitive the Chinese market is now. It's continually adapting, so the most important skill set for any salesperson doing sales in China would be to adapt and be flexible and work fast.
So we have time for one more question.
So with Guanxi and also Zenstein, it increases the cost quite a lot, I imagine, to a company in doing deals. Do you think that actually makes it less profitable to do business?
I think it's easier to land bigger deals with a strong relationship with the client. Those deals may not happen as fast, but they're definitely like bigger deals, especially for foreign companies moving in. If you see the opportunity as a foreign firm to go in and there's like a market for it, it's most likely a lot more money in that market than there is in the Western world.
There was a piece of the presentation, I think, that mentioned something about preference for process over autonomy in managing the sales force. Could you elaborate a little bit about process? And what was that part of it?
Do you remember what part this was?
I think the gist of it was that in North American culture, autonomy is good, but in managing sales forces, perhaps there was an emphasis on process, if I understood it correctly.
Oh, I think it's, we were trying to explain that because process is longer, you know, when you're building a client and you want a lot of trustworthiness in the relationship, so it's much slower pace. So I think that's why the process is important, because there's different steps in order to building, you know, close connection with the client.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So yeah, we'll answer any questions that you guys have.
Yeah, Brent.
Could you elaborate more on the point about calibrated success?
Yeah, sure. So that was from a research firm. It was the third step in that process. I think they're really trying to dive down is that successful sales organizations really understand why they're successful, so they know kind of from a high level what their value proposition is, what differentiates them from their competitors, and they understand that on a day-to-day basis they always bring that into their day-to-day events and utilize that for all of the companies that they work with.
And just like to expand on that from like the PepsiCo standpoint with calibrated success, PepsiCo's value proposition is that they pride themselves in customer service once they have Pepsi in an account. So that's kind of something they always go into accounts with and saying is that kind of if anything breaks, we'll be there the day of right away, and that's definitely really important if you think of like a restaurant or anything like that, and they need pop there. So.
What happens when your client, for example, Wawa, you have a dozen account, has a lot more power for you, they demand a ridiculous concession from Pepsi. How do you respond?
Right, so one of our questions later on in the video was kind of about using hardball tactics and how to counter them. So we suggested really ignore them. I mean, if you try to kind of want to find out why they're using such hardball tactics, and if it really is to just beat you down, it's going to affect your bottom line as a result. So you kind of ways to get around that and ways to counter hardball tactics, I guess, are to either use them yourself or to ignore them, or to even just call your client out on them and kind of say that's not the way we want to do things here, and then just really focus on building a good relationship from there.
Charles?
I know for PepsiCo and Coke, they normally try to get exclusive deals with stores so that they only sell that product. Did they talk about in your interviews about that at all and how that fits the sales strategy?
So with PepsiCo and Coke, I mean, they only have exclusivity really in food service accounts.
Okay.
So that'll be anything outside of retail. I mean, in the Loblaws or anything, they can't have exclusivity. In terms of going about that, I mean, PepsiCo prides themselves on their customer service, and that's something that they do really well over Coke, actually. So that's kind of what they go into those meetings saying, is that if you're kind of fed up with what's happening, if they're trying to convert, like they'll say if you're kind of fed up with what's happening now, we'll do better. But then Coke's value proposition is that they can offer insanely cheap prices. So that's kind of how they go into that. Other than that, it really is like building a relationship, and that's kind of how PepsiCo goes about everything there.
I guess, I have a question. What other case studies do you like sort of base your video on? You said PepsiCo
Yeah.
a lot. But
So the main two ones were PepsiCo and then Miller Hyman.
Yeah, and also we're both in negotiations this semester and working through all the case studies that we do in that class and talk with Professor Robotham. So having some applicable business like PepsiCo and the research firm, and then also some more academic sources from that
did you find that like from the different sort of research methods you used, like that different tactics were employed, and like
Right.
if so which, like
Yeah.
how were they different?
So we found through more of the academic ones, a lot of times, there's a lot of building trust, building relationships, making an integrated solution that can help everybody. But in the real world, maybe that's a little harder to do or harder to put in practice, and focuses more on getting what you want. So I think having a balance between those two things and really understanding the situation and knowing when to use one or when to use the other was a difficult part in negotiations and sales negotiations, and something that we tried to identify and suit to our presentations as we go.
Yeah, you convinced me that negotiation is like important to sales, but how do you, like, for coming out of college anyways, how do you train and improve it without any experience? I mean, you can have like one-on-one practice negotiation, but that's a completely different scenario than in real life, right?
So kind of I'll speak to what PepsiCo does is they have pretty much just like a weekend sales conference, I guess it would be, and that's where they train their new employees how to sell and how to negotiate, and from that they actually get a certification. So everyone who's doing selling has to be certified. So I'm assuming that's kind of how most companies go about it, whether it's with internal training or external as well. And then from there on, it's really just practice and sitting in on negotiations and sales calls and learning how the professionals do it.
Yeah, and a lot of firms these days for the newer groups are doing those rotational programs. So actually moving through the different departments, either within sales or more broadly, and sitting in on those meetings and just learning from first-hand experience.
And we would welcome the opportunity to answer any questions that you might have. Welcome opportunity, people.
Any questions?
Would you say that the offshore Chinese buyers are looking for different things in their real estate purchases than the regular domestic buyer would be? For example, like location? Like what I'm saying by that is I noticed that, especially in Vancouver, they weren't necessarily like into the downtown areas.
Yes, definitely. So there were a couple different sort of buyer profiles. Among them, there were a couple buyers who would buy houses for explicitly as an investment purpose. So among those, there could be people who buy the house and sit on it and treat it as if it's a stock. There are also buyers who purchase a house and also want someone to rent the property for them. So Key Marketing also does that. And then the third buyer would buy the house explicitly. We talked about how education and their kids were directly tied to real estate. Some buyers would purchase a house so that their kids could come to school in Canada and they would live in those houses. So those are the three sorts of profiles. And then going further, looking at things like location and what the buyers value. Location was a big thing. So Cam Good mentioned that there were a couple buyers who would mention cities in Canada that most of us haven't heard of and say, do you have anything in this area? Because they'd have a specific friend who told them, you have to go to Oakville or you have to go to some area where that many Asians already call their home. So yeah, location was a big thing.
Can this, so this is for the Chinese demographic, can this be used to any of the neighboring countries like Vietnam, Taiwan? And do you see any similarities between the cultures?
It's tough to say at this point because, obviously the huge surge in the Chinese, export of capital to purchase real estate is unprecedented in terms of so the answer is maybe, but there's no way to know for sure. So because China's been really a standalone instance in terms of heavy real estate investment, whereas we haven't really seen anything from, Japan or Vietnam or, many of the other Southeast Asian. All of those communities do emerge all over Canada. We have not seen this huge outflow of capital towards Canadian real estate. So the answer to your question is possibly.
Do you consider this a bubble?
Oh, that's like the big question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's somewhat beyond the scope of what we really wanted to analyze because it's a tough question to answer.
Because that could, obviously there's this influx right now of huge sales and huge potential, but considering that if it were to be a bubble, then obviously these real estate, and like, people would have to change their focus and switch to.
It's true. If there was a crash in China, which some economists think is very likely, and the fish stopped coming to the lake, then that would have pretty bad consequences for housing prices in Canada, just because of the demand that they.
Absolutely
Right.
true. What's interesting though is that the takeaway that we wanted everyone to walk away with wasn't how best to sell premium Canadian real estate to offshore Chinese buyers. In fact, what we wanted to get at was that this is a strategy for selling premium goods, premium cars, premium homes, a premium anything to offshore Chinese buyers from Canada. So whether or not there is a bubble in the housing market from offshore Chinese buyers purchasing Canadian real estate, whether or not there's a bubble, we hope that the information we present is relevant across industries. So.
What were those condo prices at approximately?
I'll see if I can remember the stats. You know,
Yeah,
just to
general
give you
price,
just to give you an idea. Per on a square foot basis in Hong Kong, I think it's about $8,000.
I'm in Canada.
And Beijing, it sits from 3,500 to 4,000, and then premium in Canada, you're going anywhere for a condo to 2,000 to 3,000 per square foot.
So it's much cheaper per square foot. And I think if you're looking for a raw number for the average condo price, they range from about $1 to $2 million.
Oh, so great.
If we're looking real downtown core Toronto, core Vancouver, it's over.
The buyers who are more interested in investment opportunities, are they more willing to explore other options in different areas? Are they still purchasing where most of the Chinese offshore people are purchasing properties? I guess they're not directly looking to live in the place.
Exactly.
It doesn't really matter where it is as long as they can see return on investment.
Yeah, so the reason that we see this at all is because we have a huge cash-rich middle class in China, and there's a lot of distrust for their banks because they're mostly state-owned. And they also have a lot of limitations on the real estate investments that they can take in China because they're having a bubble of their own over there. So that's why the money's coming in the first place. So these people just literally want to put their cash in a house or a condo. I think it's reasonable to conclude, to assert what you're saying, that location might not be as vital a factor. Seems like a reasonable, but I don't think we can say for sure.
Nothing too conclusive, but at the same time, they want assets that other people want because that makes them more valuable. So, I mean, they're interested in getting sort of the same projects that other people are working on, but they're a little bit less picky, like you would say.
You probably won't sell a cattle ranch to an offshore Chinese. So location does always play a factor, but not as big.
Yeah.
Are there any inherent challenges within the real estate sales market as opposed to maybe compared to other industries?
So what specifically?
Oh, I'm asking you, are there any?
Yeah, well, yeah, there are no, I mean, 2008 is a perfect example of real estate challenges. But among them, I think, other than the obvious things like that, a couple different things that make real estate in particular very unique is the order of magnitude of the purchase. So people are purchasing in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And so it was interesting. We talked about how Canada tried going upstream and catching the fish before they went to the lake. So he opened offices in Asia because he thought, if I can get in with consumers earlier, the better. But what we found was that with purchases this large, it was challenging to be successful in an office there because everyone wanted to see the houses. Everyone ended up coming to Canada anyway. So there were sort of subtle nuances that made real estate challenging, made real estate sales challenging in that regard.
Just getting back to this, I know you try to focus on selling premium goods, but I kind of like the real estate aspect to it.
Sure.
Like, the Canadian housing market or the real estate market is like the hottest in the world right now. There's a lot of publicity in huge magazines and huge newspapers or whatever. Like, how do you deal with the Chinese people coming to you with these concerns? If they see an economist at the front page that the Canadian housing market is going to head down, south, it's not going to do anything good. Like, how do you convince them that it's still viable as such?
Great question. I mean, like, what you're saying is definitely correct in terms of it's a very interesting market. And a lot of discussion and debate of if it's going up, if it's going down. How do you convince? I mean, I imagine it's the same as selling most things. If you're selling an equity or something, and there's always that risk that the price is going to depreciate, right? So I can't personally say I mean, you didn't really speak much to the how do you manage with the buyer's fear of a depreciation in the asset class nationwide.
Yeah. It's sort of like, there are things you can do to differentiate within the industry, and then I think what you're getting at is sort of, if there's a macroeconomic trend that all of a sudden people are scared of purchasing Canadian assets, it's a lot harder for a company like Key Marketing to be, as a single company, to influence the number of offshore purchasers. So it's very hard, but I think what's very interesting that Key Marketing does, as we talked, one thing that we said was stay local and own relationships. So they build excellent relationships with the Chinese people, Chinese buyers essentially, who come on behalf of hundreds of potential immigrants, and so keeping good relationships with them so they continue to pick Key Marketing's projects over other projects is one of the differentiators, but it's hard to fight macroeconomic trends.
In the, for lack of a better word, hierarchy of sales, what do you think of real estate salespeople?
I did work for a brief stint in kind of on the floor, for lack of a better word, the bottom of the hierarchy. And it depends a lot actually on the nature of the setup. I think of compensation. That's an important factor. So one thing that Cam Good mentioned was his company is set up from a compensation point of view as a pooled commission.
Yeah.
So there's not necessarily a huge incentive for the more senior salespeople to go after the better clients, because on a project by project basis they're getting a group commission to help each other realize a group sale. So I would imagine that like in any sales environment, the guys at the top of the hierarchy want to get the big deals. But at least the way that we can kind of get around it from a motivational point of view is by introducing these group commissions for the salespeople.
And that's made it a little bit less cutthroat, at least at Key Marketing.
Well, that sort of would be like the macro environment of their sales team. I'm talking about like all types of sales, so we're looking at business to business, to consumer, consumer to consumer. Like, do you guys think that, like, what do you think about just real estate and sales agents?
So as in sort of feel like, are they used car salesman-ish, or are they?
You can define the spectrum however you choose.
Okay.
How did it sort of relate to you deciding to do this?
I think that they're a little bit less greasy than one might initially expect. And the reason for that is, there are a couple of reasons for that. One of them is that most of the sales that they make, especially to offshore Chinese purchasers, are through warm introductions. It's the immigration agencies who've already made connections with Canadian real estate companies. They are pointed to the real estate salespeople, who essentially become tour guides, and it's less cold and they're more warm introductions. And so we talked about guanxi being important and the relationships they build. And so at least for this particular market, they very honest and do care a lot about the relationship.
And I think it's a big
satisfied with it. It's
Time for maybe 15 more seconds to close this off.
Sure. I mean, what close?
As in, we're over time.
Oh, I thought we need to sell them on something. All right. Any last questions?
I think we're good. Time-wise, are we over time?
Yeah.
Okay, we're good. Excellent.
Alright guys, so any questions you may have, please fire away. Sure.
Let's say I'm a salesperson in this industry. Who really is my client? Who am I selling stuff to?
Well, it depends on what desk you're kind of situated on. So your clients can be anywhere from high net worth retail clients, those are usually the smaller desks, to financial institutions, to corporations.
And so one of our big recommendations in one of our Q&As was, as a sales manager, understanding the personality of your salespeople really helps target, who should cover insurance clients versus maybe who should cover hedge funds or mutual funds, for example. Well, yeah.
You mentioned a lot about trust, and I think consistency has a lot to do with building trust and rapport, with the idea that there's going to be a massive amount of change and quite a lot of flux. How do you indicate any specifics around that?
Sure, so obviously the current lack of trust, one of the big reasons for that is the financial crisis. So a lot of the changes that are being implemented involve the regulation that we were talking about. And most of that regulation is centered around transparency as well as consistency in the organization with how much capital each institution needs to hold. And so most of the changes involved are actually moving towards building that trust.
And just showing your clients that you're actually compliant with all the regulations, I think, is a big thing as well in this industry now.
I guess, would that be among Canadian banks or North American?
Well, still Canadian banks have US clients. So, for example, like with Dodd-Frank regulation, even though you're like, let's say you work at a Canadian bank, CIBC, RBC, whatnot, if you have clients that face other clients in the US, you still have to make sure you have all the up-to-date regulation for them. So it still does affect our business in Canada.
Would be sort of the whole atmosphere of building trust be different in the States, just because they do have quite a different banking structure and financial structure?
I would say so, to the extent that they probably destroyed a little bit more trust than most of the Canadian banks did, but still a lot of the Canadian banks were hit quite hard, and their clients know that. So both definitely do need to put those measures in place to increase the trust. Is that
I have a quick question. When you think about the changes in the kinds of skills required to be successful on that job, can you comment on, as a Queen's Commerce student, how prepared you are potentially to take on
That's a good question.
a job like that?
I would almost feel like it's getting harder and harder to be prepared for a job like this because, as we mentioned, with all of the increased automation, really the value add now from the sales perspective is being able to sell derivative type products, which is really hard, especially coming from an undergrad degree. They're taking a lot more MBA students in this industry now just for that reason. So I would say maybe we lack a little bit more preparation than we used to when a good salesperson could just be able to really take someone out for dinner, chat them up, and get good ideas on what kind of trade they want to do the next day. So I think it's definitely getting harder from our perspective as undergrads.
And not even that, especially coming from a commerce program. One would think that most of the recruits would be from a commerce program, but more and more as different skill sets are needed, people are being recruited from different faculties, like computer science or economics and engineering and that kind of stuff. So definitely the pool of opportunities from a commerce perspective is lower.
You can consider them sales at that point?
That's a good point. Like, the thing is, in this industry, a lot of times sales and traders will overlap to some extent. Like, if you're trading a really particular product, you still have to have those sales skills, and a lot of really good salespeople started out in trading. So when they're looking from an undergrad or from a really base level, they're still looking for those skills regardless.
Would you say there's a future in this career given all the automation and the tools?
Definitely. So as we were talking about, there's still going to be products that aren't going to be able to be automated in the near future, such as these derivative products. Also a lot of bonds and characteristics that you can't actually just trade them without the human interaction. Also, part of the whole trust issue is people want to be able to have a human face to ask questions to feel comfortable knowing who they're dealing with. So in that sense, yes, as long as they're clients and as long as they're products that can't be automated, there will be sales.
You mentioned that the regular S&T person is very cutthroat and type A personality. Given that you're automating some of these processes, do you see that changing moving forward, or is it going to stay mainly the same?
I would say that maybe makes it a little bit worse, actually.
Yeah, so with the automation and that kind of stuff, everyone's going to be fighting over the clients that aren't wanting that. So in that sense, the client cannibalization between people on a desk can get even worse.
It also just reduces the number of jobs generally that are available on the floor. So if anything, that makes a lot of the younger people even more cutthroat to get those positions.
Okay.
Yes, Patrick.
You spoke about having type A personality, being cutthroat, and I understand that both of you have jobs on a sales desk. Do you think you guys are cutthroat enough and have a type A personality to succeed in your role as a salesperson?
I think that as we both completed successful internships, in order to secure these jobs, we have proved ourselves that we can, in fact, function in that kind of environment.
What advice do you have for a sales manager around compensation in this evolving sort of field?
Right, so one of the hardest parts about the compensation factor on the trading floor is that the direct managing director doesn't actually have that much influence over their own sales team's compensation, traditionally. Usually it's a higher ranking executive, and a lot of that compensation is directly tied to how the market's doing at the time. And I think that a lot of salespeople realize that. While it can be upsetting to them that if the market's not doing well, their bonuses get cut, everybody usually has a pretty large base salary anyways to begin with.
And one other thing to remember too is like a lot of people think it's cutthroat and like salespeople are just like vying for commissions, trying to get clients' business. But as a really good salesperson in this industry also understands that it's not just about building a relationship with a client as much as it is building a relationship with the trader that you're working with, because your number one priority is still managing that trader's risk. So even though you'll see a lot of times like, oh, I could get a huge commission from this trade, but if it's going to throw my trader's risk off, I'm not going to go through with that. So good salespeople do have that element of understanding as well.
Is there an example, like personally, where you demonstrated your cutthroat abilities?
When I had to get 9 coffees before 5 a.m. I mean, we were really executing too many trades as an intern. Do you have any good one?
I don't know, like, obviously there's.
Now you previously just mentioned that you did.
Well, I think again, just to speak to the fact that like with all the automation, the number of the positions are really shrinking. So for example, like my summer class was 15 people, and they usually take 15 people coming through full time, and they cut that to 8 this year. So like it really was about being cutthroat and showing that you're the best person to get the job, and that is going to really reflect through the first few
Did you
years.
name the 8?
Pardon? Could I name them?
Did
Well,
you,
no one else.
Did you help in the process of naming the 8?
No, but I wanted to be one of them. So it's about kind of being not necessarily cutthroat and hurting other people. Like that's not how the industry works. But it's just about being able to show your direct superiors that maybe you can do your job better than the next person.
Yeah, definitely in the recruitment aspect of transitioning to a full-time position, everyone's kind of aware of how many spots there are, how many people are there, and what desks have availabilities. And so a lot of people do kind of just decide that they want to be sat on a desk and then go behind someone else's back. And it's just about almost not ruining your connections with other people, but going about things in a way that you prove your ability and keeping everyone happy at the same time.
So that's, I mean, that's interesting in the sense that like that's not how I would define the word cutthroat.
I know.
But is that what people think?
Well, it's hard for us to
If
be
somebody is like ruining their relationships with other people, you don't want to be involved with that, right? So it's almost in a sense you need to be able to navigate and almost cut people off while maintaining relationships. Do you get what I'm saying?
No, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
How are we doing for time, Julie?
Yeah, you got 2.5 minutes.
Okay.
It seems to me that like, I mean, it seems to me that the culture seems to be like sort of very political, bureaucratic sort of thing. Do you think that affects, in these sorts of organizations, I've never worked out in so the environment gets really heated, and so employee morale and the overall performance of organizations affected pretty negatively. Like, do you notice that might be a possibility?
Yeah, but I wouldn't say that's because it's a bureaucratic process as much as it is just the environment that you're working in. Like the market changes really quickly, so you have to be able to like close a sale in like 30 seconds. It's not so much that it's the politics about where you're sitting that makes it that way, as much as it's just the forces that are affecting your business, I would say.
Similar question about like the environment. A lot of times, I guess, commerce students or undergraduate students go in not knowing exactly what the culture is like, but then you kind of, because you spend so much time working with those people in that type of product or whatever, you kind of change and like you take like the riskier trades and you become less, I guess, ethical in a sense, and you become more aggressive or cutthroat. How do you suggest that new graduates fight that, or do you think that's just something that you have to do to be successful in that kind of sector? So
I think the best practices in the industry are definitely trying to combat that right now, and new entrants into the industry are definitely discouraged from doing that. I mean, especially as a new entrant, if you do something like that and you mess up, you're out, you're done, and everyone will know that. No one will ever hire you. So there's definitely reasons not to do that at all.
And it depends what kind of area in the business you're into. Like for example, if you're in equity research, you're kind of facing a completely different environment that could be more suited to somebody who's not comfortable with that kind of situation.
We have time for one more question.
So when you think of these environments and you think about sort of those what would you do scenarios, in a type A high stress environment, there's probably lots of lines that potentially get crossed due to people being tired, stressed out. What advice do you have for a sales manager in that environment in terms of knowing when to make an issue of something and when to manage it? Because it could get out of hand pretty quickly, couldn't it?
So this was definitely something that we talked about when we were interviewing the manager that was speaking in our video. So he definitely said that his number one advice was to know every single personality on your sales team to a T, and also the personality of the traders, so that you can foresee potential issues and also know who kind of is at a head, and also position them so that one guy will be totally far away from the other guy, so that you're A, preventing situations from arising, and also B, just if it was to arise, just make a kind of a pre-solution to,
Almost anticipate.
yeah.
Wow, nice. Okay.
Thank
beautiful.
you.
Probably, you stated that, it takes a lot of, like, an analytical approach, like the skills required, which would bring about a type of salesperson. Yet, there's also that whole overall organizational role of very customer-centric. So I guess how would a firm go about, sort of mitigating the two?
That's a really interesting question. So that actually, I guess, there's a few ways to go about it from just our research. So sales traditionally, like you'll have one salesperson in traditional organizations that's responsible for closing the deal. In this situation, because you require an extremely analytical approach, and like when I mean, for example, just a few years back there was a new term coined, a new position called data scientist. So a lot of tech companies that are focused on analytics and an analytical approach to this stuff, they hire data scientists. But data scientists are like PhDs in statistics. They don't have much sales experience. So what's starting to happen in these industries now is, and insurance it's just starting to happen, but in tech it's already prevalent, is that you have people who are very, very proficient in analytics, and their skills are complemented by people who are professional in sales. So you can't just have a salesperson, a traditional salesperson, so to speak, walk into a room and start closing deals, because there's just so much knowledge that's required to analyze all this data. You need other people who are extremely, extremely proficient in understanding this. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, I guess just more about, so would you then train the more analytical types to sell to customers, or would it be the opposite? Great salesperson.
So that would be one approach, which would obviously require the organization to invest a lot of resources into training that person. But we think that the process of closing the deal when it comes to big data is getting so complicated that you need people in the sales process that are specialized in specific components of the sales process. So you have a data scientist who's responsible to deal with anything that's analytical, and then you have the person who's sort of the relationship building individual, helping that person, the data scientist, carry on with the process. So it'll be broken into like linear components. If that makes sense.
I'm curious what you were talking about the Internet of Things in relation to auto insurance. So what you're implying is, if I'm going to insure your car, I install a black box, so to speak, that takes your patterns, how fast you go, how often you slam your brakes. I give you a dynamic price for insurance based on that sort of thing.
Partially, that's true. I mean, a lot of the new cars that are coming out, they're coming out now with an operating system, so Tesla cars, or Google Maps, which actually gives the manufacturers the option to actually have a relationship where they can track, where the car is traveling, if it's in a collision, or all other statistics that they can collect about the car. So it's going to be, so to answer your question, yes, it does require a partnership from the driver and the insurance company to come up with more of a favorable rate.
So is there some big privacy concerns regarding having a GPS and
definitely, yeah. That's one of the technical constraints or problems that is going to be in technology. It's always going to be a privacy problem, yes.
Yeah, the thing is, remember, privacy, there's, to getting customized things, there's always a huge opportunity cost, and that's privacy, right? Consumers, and a lot of the stuff that we
actually researched on in insurance actually relates really interestingly to the tech space. People complain about, you know, companies like the whole NSA thing with Google, Yahoo, and Facebook releasing our information, but at the same time, if we want to get the best quality possible from the stuff that we use, there is some opportunity cost, and that's privacy. So we think in order for customers to get the best experience in insurance, in terms of price, they'll have to give up, you know, that
Yeah, same like with Facebook. Everyone uses Facebook. We don't complain about that.
yeah.
How do you overcome the opportunity cost of giving insurance companies more data about yourself for like telematics? So I think if Justo currently installed a black box on your car, and they give you a 10% discount. But in the long run, do you see that 10% discount being sustainable?
So the whole point of this is not to give upfront discounts or not to give upfront pricing. In other words, lock in a price that's going to go forever. So once you have this source of a black box, or once you have live data, you can customize solutions going forward. You can have contracts based on, you know, for example, they'll review it after 4 months, or given these conditions if you don't come into, you know, a collision or stuff like that. So the whole point of this is to not to make the, you know, fact-based decisions based on static data, it's based on live data. So to answer your question is to combat that very problem.
What are kind of like the cost implications to these big companies on storing all this data?
Yeah, it's actually interesting. Companies already have a lot of data. Big data is not necessarily about so volume is one aspect, right? A lot of companies have so much data that they barely know how to utilize what they actually have. There's too much stuff to make sense of, you know? And so the storage aspect is not really the problem. It's the analytics that's the problem right now. I mean, if we had the capacity, intellectual capacity 10 years ago, I'm sure we could have done big data analytics. It's just that now we have the technology and, you know, I guess the intellectuality stuff like that comes with big data
So
analysis.
storage cost isn't really a big factor.
It's a factor, but it's not.
Yeah, storage is the cheapest. Like, yeah, the trend in technology is that storage, you know, gets cheaper year by year, so that's not a problem at all. Especially with cloud computing, so that's not a problem at all.
So you're usually talking about like data mining, when you say big data, again with the analytics, i.e. data mining, right? Data mining.
What about data mining?
But is that essentially a synonym for what you're talking about here?
Yeah.
The analytics of big data, i.e. data mining.
A part of it, yes.
Is there more than?
I mean, data mining is really limited by like 3 aspects of it again. I mean, it's like, you know, for example, a good example to give is like one of the biggest pilot projects is being undertaken by other PDs, the Los Angeles Police Department. They have the capacity of doing data mining, and they, for example, they maintain the database of all of the 300 million criminal records that happened over past however many years. And they were able to get kind of like a heat map of, like, you know, where the next criminal acts are most likely to happen. But then the problem came into be is like, you know, it's kind of them telling their police officers, okay, this is how you should go about doing your everyday duty. And, you know, these are police officers that have been working for like 30, 35 years, and they're like, oh, now you're essentially telling me how I should, you know, pretty much protect the community. So the problem with big data, or what we try to tackle, is it's not just analytics, it's not just implementation. It's like a big structural and organizational dilemma as well that limits all of these aspects.
Is mining a subset of the analytics?
Yes. Subset of the analytics, yeah. In terms of, I'm not sure as to exactly what you're asking.
Obviously, so you're talking about data mining, you're talking about the big data and analytics, and that's obviously tied to like a business process to actually make some change. But is the big data analytics the exact same as data mining?
Yeah.
I know that the adoption rates for this is different per industry. Which industries would you say it has the highest adoption rate? I know Tesco just started like looking at who's looking at the ads and then changing the ads depending on who's looking. And so would you say that the groceries are ahead of this, or are the insurance people more advanced on this?
So are you saying in general, like what industries?
Exactly.
That's a really good question. Insurance is definitely, it's heating up. I think one example where it's at a point where it's starting to get a lot of attention and a lot of investments is education.
So you have a lot of companies where there's a company called Newton in Boston, I think, and they've been developing a technology. They're essentially, their goal is to compile a bunch of data and determine when students, understands math at the optimal time. So it might be like, okay, you understand mathematics from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. The best, and you understand science from this time to this time, and you do your exams well on this date, or like on average. And so you have these sort of companies that are partnering up with school districts to leverage a whole bunch of data. And I mean, by data, I'm not just talking about like it takes several years. So if you starting from kindergarten all the way until grade 12, they'll be collecting data on you. And when you're in grade 12, you can imagine how targeted that information is. The technology can tell the teacher, like, teach Gerald math 10 a.m. Thursdays, that's it. He understands math best at that time. And so it's really interesting, like there's a lot of pilot projects already happening in Boston. But yeah, that would be a perfect example of where it's getting really, really needed.
So the pricing of insurance or premiums has always been formulaic, algorithm driven. Now you're saying it's going to be getting more sophisticated in that regard. Can you comment on how it's probably going to be the death of a salesperson, not dissimilar to what Chelsea and Danielle talked about, but you guys alluded to the fact that you're going to be combining a data scientist with a salesperson. I would think you'd actually just get rid of the salesperson. Can you comment around that and tell me why that may not be the case then?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think that might be the case because you can't the value add of the person who doesn't understand the key component of the entire sales process, which is going to be data analytics, is very, very low for a company. So I think like what you alluded to before, would you start training data scientists to be salespeople as well? That might be the next most optimal thing to do. But the traditional definition of how we define salespeople, I guess, might get outdated.
Okay. Anyone here going into sales and insurance next year? Anyone? Anyone working at Chubb or anything like that? Underwriting? Okay, I guess that's encouraging. Okay, how are we doing for time?
That's it.
Okay, good.